And I want to welcome everybody. Again, I'm Terry DeVoe with the Grants to States program. And every year we try to put together a refresher on the state program report because in recent years, it's definitely seen differences, especially with those stimulus funds. But I'm very happy to report that we are getting back to normal order this year, where you do not have either CARES or ARPA to report on in addition to your allotments. You just have your allotment grants. So we are going to cover what that means for you this year. We've got a great program outlined, and it starts with a quiz. We're going to start you off just with some warm-up questions. There is no pressure. Since you're muted, we're going to ask you if you want to respond to the quiz questions to just type those into chat, and we'll get a sense of where the answers are landing, and then we will share the actual answers. We're going to give you some top takeaways near the top of the hour so that if your time is limited and you can only stay for a portion, at least you'll hear the most important essential things that we want you to take away from this webinar. We'll cover reporting deadlines. We often get questions that pertain to how obligating funds versus liquidating funds are different. And so we're going to cover that. Although we're not going to get deep into allowable costs in this webinar, there are some considerations that when we review the SPR each year, we think, ooh, it would be good to cover these again. So we're going to just go through some light touch allowable costs. Similarly, the interim federal financial report, which is actually reporting just on financial data for the 2023 award, which is the one that you just were issued this past year, we often have typical mistakes, like the same kinds of mistakes made across from report to report to report. So if you happen to be a finance contact for your state that are tuning in today and you're responsible for this portion of the report, we encourage you to stick around so that you can hear how we would love to see that report filled out. And then we're going to get into the main report and entering project data and the financial status report and the administrative part of the report, the administrative costs, and then just some general best practices for the state program report. So we have a full gamut of things to share with you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dennis, who's going to get us started with this quiz.
Buddy. It's great to see so many people attending. And again, as Terry mentioned, this is just a warm up to get our kind of wheels spinning with some of these questions. But oh wow, we already have some answers, so I will get right to it. True or false? Both the interim financial report and the final report are due on December 30th. I'm seeing a flood of false, which is very exciting because that is the correct answer. Yes, it used to be this way, but obviously things have changed. And while one deadline has been extended, the interim financial report has remained due still on December 30th. I think the answer will pop up, I think, on the slide. Okay, which are the best dates to reflect in a project? A, the default dates of the entire 2-year grant period. B, dates for when the project actually ran. Or C, project dates can start 30 days before the start of the grant period and 30 days after. I'm also seeing such wonderful immediate consensus of, again, the correct answer. This is a good warm-up so far. We're looking for B, dates for when that project actually ran. Now, if you wanted to be a stickler and overly technical and break the system like I would do, you could say that technically A and B were correct if your project actually ran for the whole 2 years. But again, we're just looking for real dates of when activities and funds applied were actually happening during that time period. Next question. Which of these is an administrative cost? A, collections for a new teen room. B, a trainer's salary and benefits for a computer class. C, new office furniture for the State Library Administrative Agency. Or D, all of the above. This is interesting. Seeing some less of a barrage of answers immediately. Yeah, Interesting, interesting, interesting. Good. Well, the correct answer is C, new office furniture for the State Library Administrative Agency. And we'll talk about the difference, what it constitutes an administrative cost later. We'll also talk about how that differs from maybe a subrecipient's indirect costs and how those kinds of principles overlap. That's all coming later. So that was a good warm up. Question number 4. What is a baseline consideration for bundling discrete grant activities? Bundling question into a single SPR project. A, when a single grantee is running multiple grants. B, when grants with statewide audiences and large price tags don't have a lot of exciting outcomes. Or C, when the work all supports a single intent and the same subjects and beneficiary audiences. This one's a little bit more unanimous. And you all are correct. When the work all supports a single intent and the same subjects and beneficiary audiences. If that's a lot of words to process, that's okay. We go over bundling in more specifics later. So yes, you all made it and survived the warm-up quiz. Congratulations. Now moving on to the top takeaways before we get into some of the nitty-gritty how-to logistics of working in the SPR. A top takeaway, and you'll see this theme several places throughout this presentation, is to submit all your reports in the SPR, not EGMS. EGMS is built as a system to receive reports, and so that's why it can be confusing for people who are in the EGMS more often than the SPR. But for grants to states, considering the complexity of our program, we submit everything in the SPR, and that will always be the case. The second top takeaway is not to have 2 tabs or windows open when in the SPR. We recommend instead, especially we see this, we urge people not to do this for the sake of data integrity. When you have 2 tabs or windows open, the system doesn't know what content to save. And this often happens when multiple users might be in the system. So what we recommend instead is if you need somebody to review a draft of a project that you've written up or financials, to use the print function, save it as a PDF and ask for feedback that way if you have to do that. The third top takeaway would be to open the final financial status report and save it one last time before you certify your report. Some of you may have heard feedback from us on this where we needed you, before we could accept your report, to save the FSR one more time. And that's because saving is also sort of a sync button, because so much of the FSR has fields that auto calculate and pull from your project financials. So if you started your FSR once and you hit save and it was marked as completed, but then you made additional tweaks to your projects, the FSR won't reflect those changes until you hit save. So that's a top takeaway, and we will cover that further again later in the webinar. The fourth top takeaway is similar to the first one. If you have any state contact updates, if somebody changes a position, if somebody vacates a position or somebody is new, use the state info section of the SPR and not EGMS. What we use our state info section and are alerted of changes to that as soon as they're made. And then Laura primarily, who is a huge help, make sure once we get that notification that those contacts are reflected in all of your open awards in EGMS. And that will also ensure that they're on the right communication and contact lists for communications. So those are important. And then the final top takeaway for this section is a reminder of the authorizing official certification steps. So as you are wrapping up the certification process and working with your authorizing official, who is often your state librarian, but not always, the steps for the interim FFR is going through projects, then a financial status report, and then choosing the interim FFR. And then there's a certify button at the top. That differs from when you're having your certifying official certify the financial status report and all the rest of the projects related to that. That's going into projects, certify projects, and then clicking the certify reports button again, and then you're asked to enter your password, and then those projects are certified. We will go through visually those steps later on in the webinar. Another top level reminder is upcoming reporting deadlines. You all knocked out of the park this true or false question, so I'm thrilled to just reinforce what you already know. But the 2023 interim federal financial report is due December 30th. And once again, that's like a halfway through your open award sort of check-in. That's separate from your what's due at the end of January, which is your 2022 final financial status report, which encompasses your performance report, which are your SPR projects. And that is sort of your full picture closeout of the entire 2022 award. And as a reminder, if you're unable to meet your reporting deadline, you do need to contact us before that deadline to ask for a reporting extension. And as always, it would be one of our webinars without our handy dandy visual timelines that we'd love to pair it out. We're especially excited because it's a simpler timeline than in the couple of years previously presentations that we've given. So that's very exciting. But this is just here to once again remind everyone that we offer Grants to States awards on a yearly basis, but as you all are probably aware, most of you, the award period is 2 years. So that inevitably creates overlap where often there are 2 awards open at any given moment. And so this just exemplifies that. We have October 1 to September 30th at the top there. And then those dark boxes right after the award period is finished represents how much time you have to close out your financials, making sure everything is reconciled, and also get the SPR submitted. And we'll talk more about liquidation and obligation in a little bit, but I also wanted to just add a caveat to this visualization that even though that dark box at the end indicates when you can, the time that you have to report after the grant period's over, it doesn't mean to suggest that you can't add projects that are completed before the end of the grant period to the SPR. The SPR is always open for you to begin adding projects. So I just wanted to make that clear. Yes, as I mentioned, I wanted to cover just the difference between what obligating funds compared to liquidation of funds from a Grants to States perspective. This little quote is pulled from the Grants to States award guidance. That is, if you have a link to the PowerPoint, this is a link to that guidance that's on the Grants to States manual. And this guidance also shows up in your each grant award in eGMS under your files. So, but this says all project activities must be completed and all funds obligated by September 30th, 2023. And all financial obligations incurred under the award must be liquidated by January 29th, 2024. So I hope that clarifies that we're still looking at, from a time period, activities and charges obligated within the allowable period of performance. As long as they've been obligated and you can demonstrate that the activity took place before September 30th, that's fine. And then you have from October 1 to January 29th to actually do the liquidation. And liquidating could include reconciling accounts, making some like final journal adjustments or journal entries related to things, again, that occurred within the grant period, and then making payment requests from IMLS to make sure the balance is zeroed out or the balance just matches what you've actually spent the award. And hey, have you heard this before? Here's another reminder to submit all the reports through the SPR for a Grants to States program and not eGMS. So we just would love to visually remind you, emphasize that, help rehearse that so there's no confusion. And for your convenience, there's a link to the SPR at the bottom of this slide. But once again, if you're ever tempted to submit a report in eGMS, if eGMS ever tries to convince you that you should be submitting reports there, do not listen. And remember, these tips from this refresher. Okay, and so another top takeaway, and this is more related to you as you can compile some of the narrative elements of your SPR related to costs that are not allowable, that some of the narrative and even some of the budget descriptions could allude to that we don't want to see in a project. And so so these are some examples of costs that are not allowable. Entertainment, for example. There is a fine line with most of these, there is a fine line. So that's why we kind of want to make it clear that it is not something unallowable. If you are paying for a band to play music related to maybe a cultural literacy program, that is not technically entertainment, that's related to education. But if all you say is, you know, we had a great band at this event, then it can be construed as entertainment. Advocacy is a little bit clearer, but we often see advocacy or advocacy adjacent language often with projects that go toward trustee groups, which makes sense. But we just have to make sure that funding, LSTA funding in this context deals with, it does not relate to advocacy or fundraising. Something else we see a lot, which there is also a fine line with, is general marketing. It has to be specific to an LSTA funded project. And so just remember that when you're paying for marketing or when marketing is going toward a project, it should not be posed or presented as, you know, we let the general public know how great the library is. It has to be specific to something that was funded with LSTA funds. Something we also don't want to see in a project, and this is sort of, especially in this post-ARPA, kind of returning back to what grants to states funds are initially intended for, furniture with no programmatic purpose. There is some furniture, as you all know, that helps maybe in certain early literacy contexts, which is fine, but just upgrading furniture for a subrecipient or a library would not be considered allowable. And certainly in a state library context would not be considered a direct cost. Supplanting funds. This is federal funds that are used in place of local funds. So if we see budget descriptions or narratives that said, you know, these federal funds have helped kind of replace gaps or losses in our municipality's operating budget, that would be considered supplanting, because federal funds are intended to be used to supplement or to add, be in addition to the baseline local funding. Another reference we don't want to see is costs associated with starting a new organization. So, you know, we think new organizations are great. You know, that's fine, but just purely from a legislative and allowable cost standpoint, our funds simply cannot go towards startup costs of starting a new organization. Another reference we don't want to see in a project are operational costs in state library administrative agency projects. And we'll go over this, but in a future slide, but this would be considered an administrative cost. And so that would go under the administrative project instead. And then finally, this is maybe sort of an umbrella or a catch-all, activities unrelated to the Library Services and Technology Act purposes and priorities. This, in the context, to contextualize this and where we saw this, especially after reading a lot of innovative ARPA funding projects, it's great to work with community organizations or maybe even other state or agencies or organizations. But they always have to be, any costs or any funding that we support these organizations or these collaborations still have to be under the umbrella of LSTA purposes and priorities. We don't, for example, you know, we don't want to put money all into an outside organization for them to do their work. The library has to be integrated in some capacity, and the purposes and priorities of providing library services to the public still has to be considered in those kinds of activities and projects. And I see questions, but I am trusting that they are being answered. Okay, great. So I do believe now that I'm passing it on to Laura for the interim FFR portion.
Yes, thank you, Dennis.
We will be going into how to enter your interim FFR data for the FY23 allotment award. We've had to return a lot of these reports in recent years, so we just wanted to review some common issues. As a reminder, we've included a screenshot here that shows the path to the interim federal financial report in the SPR. Which you'll fill out with your FY 2023 allotment information. From the projects menu, you would select financial status report and then select interim FFR. For the FFR federal agency grant number, make sure that you write in the allotment log number, and these are seen here on the screen. You can find it in the IMLS EGMS reach system, as well as on your official award notification document, which is seen here in red at the bottom of the page. And this is a screenshot showing where you can locate the amount drawn down in reach. First, you'll want to go to the payments tab in the 2023 award record. Then look at the total approved request figure as seen circled here in the middle of the page. Be sure to look at the request status date as shown circled in red at the bottom of the page, and then subtract any requests approved after September 30th, 2023. And here we have the total federal funds authorized field. This is auto-populated, and it reflects the FY 2023 allotment amount. And you note that you may have to open the report and hit save for the auto-populated fields to appear. The federal share of expenditures will be how much you've expended on your award as of September 30th, 2023. And you can find this information in EGMS Reach under the payments area. The total recipient share required field is also auto-populated, and it reflects the allotment match requirement. And in the recipient share of expenditures fields, you will report on how much you've contributed to match so far. And again, as I mentioned before, in recent years, we've been returning a lot of interim FFRs. And so we wanted to just highlight some of the most common issues we've seen. Cash disbursements should match EGMS reach payments as of September 30th, 2023. And the amount in cash disbursements typically matches the federal share of expenditures. You'll want to leave indirect expenses blank, and you will also typically leave program income blank. We've also included a link here at the bottom of this slide if you want to see more tips. Also note that the interim FFR has its own certification process. This sometimes falls through the cracks, and we'll follow up. The authorized certifying official, which is usually the chief officer, needs to certify by the reporting deadline of December 30th, 2023. And you can ensure the certification went through by looking at the certification fields in the interim FFR, which once certified should contain the name of the chief and a date stamp. And with that, I will pass it back to Dennis.
I'm going to go over going through some of the elements of the administrative project and what is considered costs under the administrative project. What you would use the administrative project for, or what it is available to you to use for, are funds that fit as administrative costs under 4% of your total award, as well as any other state or local match that would be considered administrative costs. And so you have up to 4% that you can use, but you don't have to use all 4% for administrative costs. And so this kind of breaks down what administrative costs are. I won't read every bullet by bullet, but I will kind of give a top level overview. the administrative cost, something we probably heard, if you've been around us talking about costs a lot, you've probably seen a lot of these adjectives to describe them, but they're necessary, reasonable, allocable, and we underscored allowable because even if they are under this umbrella of maybe indirect, they still have to be allowable. And they still have to be, they are often associated with the state library's management, oversight, and administration of plans and activities funded under the Library Services and Technology Act, or LSTA. As you can see here, there's a list of examples, personnel who manage and administrate the LSTA program, travel expenses of those who would be maybe doing site visits or other sort of administrative activity would be considered an administrative cost. Any costs related to financial management or even audit of the LSTA program would be considered administrative. This is a big one that we see a lot and that we kind of provide guidance on is facilities related costs, rent, maintenance, utilities, security. That would be considered indirect, but still related to the administration of the program. And so that would fall under administrative costs. State advisory councils, any costs associated with the state advisory council and convening them would be considered it. The publicizing of the state plan, potentially also the work related to the plan and the evaluation. And if you do subgrants, grant selection, and obviously if you needed federal funds to cover your time reporting on the federal funds, it would be considered administrative cost. I want to indicate with those bullets on the bottom there that the 4% ceiling is related to the federal funds of administrative costs at the state library agency, but there is not a ceiling on state or local funds that go toward administrative costs. And the reason why that might be helpful to you, not only just to provide a complete picture maybe of how your state or other funds are supporting the administration of the program, which would certainly be helpful to know, but that would putting match funds in that column in your administrative project would count towards your overall match requirement. So in the event that that would help you, just know that your state funds, you wouldn't have to have, that's not part of the cap for the 4%. Administrative now on the subaward side, administrative costs are counted within the project, and those would be considered under each subrecipient's indirect cost rate. So that does not count toward the 4% ceiling. That would be related to whatever indirect cost rate your subrecipient has negotiated. And as many of you may already know, that de minimis at least is 10%. So when you're dealing with subrecipients, often their indirect costs or administrative costs would be, the percentage would be higher than what a state library has with the 4% ceiling. And this is what part of the, this is what the administrative costs section of the financial status report looks like. And just to briefly kind of give you a sense of how the form works, under the allowed column, that is auto-calculated and provided automatically because we have all of your award data in the SPR already. And so it's already giving you that number automatically based on 4% of your award. And in this case, your FY22 award for reporting purposes. The actual column will be auto-populated from the number you provide in the administrative project, specifically under the federal column. And so that will be what rolls up into the actual. And as I mentioned earlier, if you don't see that number in there and you've already added it to your administrative project, you might need to save your FSR again to make sure that the number carried over. And then the third column is obviously just the difference between these two numbers. And so, as I mentioned, if you have any incorrect calculations, try saving it again and you might get the number in the right place. So this is once again, more of the financial status report and beyond the administrative part, just areas that we want to point out that you need to fill out compared to compared to what the system fills out. So the first thing that you would need to fill out that isn't automatically populated is the grant award number. And now that we are not dealing with 2 awards under 1 fiscal year, there'll just be 1 grant award number. And you can find that in your official award notification in EGMS under the line that says Federal Award ID number, or FAIN. Also, if you're in EGMS already, the EGMS will organizes your awards by the number, and so you'll be able to see the award number that way also. And the total federal funds authorized for this funding period, that section is already in the system, and you can see in the state allotment table the award amounts are reflected there too, but that's not something you would have to manually enter. And this is another section of the FSR, specifically the match and the federal outlays section. As you can see, those first 3 fields are once again auto-populated, but they're auto-populated based on the numbers that you provide in other sections of the SPR, specifically the projects in this case. So it will take any financials that you've added under match state or match other across all of your projects, including your administrative project, and it will pull that and add all of that into 1 number. And once again, if it's not showing the right number, it might be you needing to save the FSR once again to show the updated figures. And so that will give you the total match. And then that 4th line that says minimum match required, that is auto-populated because it's a flat, the match is always a flat 33% of your total award. So that's already in there. So that's fairly straightforward. And then that final field down at the bottom, the federal share of net outlays. This is another auto-populated number. And this is all of your LSTA financials, that column in all of your projects rolled up into this number. So basically, all that to say is, if you expected or anticipate that you've spent down all of your award, then the federal share of net outlays, when you're all finished reporting, that number should be the same as the total award amount that you were given. And so hopefully that kind of helps you as you're cross-checking and making sure that you have reported all the financials for across your projects. Turn it over to Cindy.
Thanks, Dennis. I'm going to kick off this section by going over some first steps if you are a new user, as well as some suggested approaches for preparing your SPR report. I saw some new names on our participant list today. So if you do not have a login for the SPR, your IMLS program officer can set you up in the system by creating an account for you. Your username is typically your email address, and we will send you your password. You can change your password by going into the account management section of the SPR after you've logged in. Please note that we recommend Chrome and Firefox as far as browsers for the system. Issues with saving and editing may occur, and we've talked about this, but it absolutely bears repeating. If you happen to have 2 browser windows open or tabs while working in the SPR, it's best to avoid that by using, well, this often occurs when users want to look back at the prior year's report while completing the current year's, especially if you're trying to copy and paste previous or statewide projects. However, this often leads to editing and reporting bugs. Instead, use the print function within older projects and grab a PDF of the text so you can view it concurrently. A caveat to this, to avoiding a secondary tab, is when an activity tab automatically pops up. I'm just going to find the right slide. There we go. One of the first things that you should do when logging into the SPR for the first time is updating or verifying your own information. as well as the info about your state library, including fields like the UEI, which appears in the final report. All three of these options are in the account management menu. If your state library grants subawards, don't forget to maintain the subaward info section in the SPR. The subaward info section is separate from the project section of the SPR and provides information about subawards beyond just the ones that were funded. This is a great way for IMLS to keep track of award applications that you received but didn't necessarily fund. Some writing tips for projects. I'm not going to go through these, but when you're working through the SPR and individual projects, in addition to using some plain language, remember that the report is happening after the completion of activities and should be written in past tense. The SPR reports should avoid library jargon. We all have that alphabet soup in our brains. And you should keep in mind that the text will be accessible to the general public. The one exception to using names, proper names in the report is with outside consultants, and it's acceptable to use their names in the report. When working through abstracts, project abstracts, or activity abstracts, IMLS does not need a general SLAA program description or history. Think about, what did you do this year? What was accomplished? It should generally reflect the budget and activities. And I will also say that after years of formatting woes in the SPR abstracts, we have updated the system this year to render everything plain text. So hopefully you will not see all that spacing issues if you're copying and pasting from other reports into the abstracts. That was our goal. So hopefully you'll see. You're welcome. So yeah, that was a goal. Apparently that was a good goal. So if you have subawardees or project directors filling things out in the SPR, these tips are really important points to relay to them. And as always review and or proofread prior to submission to IMLS. And you're all very welcome. I'm so glad you're very happy about that one. So statewide projects, this tends to stump some folks, rightfully so. I know in my former life, it was always something that I had to really stop and think hard on. An example of a statewide project might be statewide databases. They are provided to everyone in the state. However, something like summer reading, while potentially made available to the entire state, may not have statewide uptake and only have a few participating libraries. If this is the case, summer reading probably isn't a statewide project, even if the grantee, and you can list the grantee as the SLAA. Instead, in the activity area, indicating the participating libraries by name or number would be optimal for reporting. Bundling projects. For those of you who have known me, especially when I was a former LSTA coordinator, you know I love a good bundle. There are several criteria that must be met to combine a subaward into a single project. At a minimum, they support the same intent and cover the same subjects. For example, if a state completed a continuing ed project that offered grants of, say, $2,000 to individual libraries, the grants could be bundled as one project or one line item with different locales listed in the SPR. In cases like these, you would list the state library or SLAA contact as the project director. If you have straightforward purchases by a number of libraries that are more expensive, such as bookmobiles, which we saw a lot of during ARPA, they could also be bundled, even if they're a lot more expensive. You would indicate the subrecipient at the activity level in the locale section, if possible, or report them by number to keep the administrative burden in check. And this is another example of bundling. 75 libraries within a state utilized funds to purchase learning kits. These projects could be bundled into a single line item in the SPR, so long as the libraries were counted somewhere, either by institution name or institution type at the activity level. And don't forget, SLAAs can always upload additional materials to support various projects or provide details if appropriate. Now, this slide may look familiar to you, hopefully, at least those of you who worked on the most recent 5-year plan. Projects should have one intent. There are 14 intents to choose from with 6 focal areas in parentheses. Intents are critical to knowing how to report and define your projects. And the intents are related to the crosswalk your state library submitted within their 5-year plan. State goals correspond to focal areas, and projects correspond to intents. Now, Madison is going to provide some more details on reporting individual projects.
Thank you so much, Cindy. All right, so we're going to tackle some activities. An overall principle of the SPR framework is limiting activities to 10 per project. A related principle is that more complex or more expensive projects would likely have more activities. To consider something an activity, it should account for at least 10% of the total budget of the project, and that includes both IMLS funds and matching or in-kind funds. Now, let's talk a little bit about the descriptions. Here's an example of an activity abstract that briefly outlines what happened. This is a great example. It's succinct, clear, and provides only the necessary info. You keep hearing us say only describe, only write what happened this year, and this is what it's doing. Ask yourself, does the writing the activities and abstract accurately reflect what is going on in the budget? We want to see these activities reflect your budget figures. You can see the activity mode, the activity and mode selections here in this screenshot underneath, which are instruction, consultation. Activities also prompt you to enter quantities, which is not in the screenshot. And these can be how long a program lasts in minutes, how many consultations there are, which would be an example for this one, or how many books were purchased. And a somewhat common issue we see is leaving those quantities blank with zeros. So when you're filling out these activities, be sure to put figures in those quantities. Now, the selection of the activity type should generally follow the spending and focus of the project. If you have staff attending conferences, you want to use the instruction-other activity and mode. And activities, the surveys that you do for your activities do not need to be logged in as a separate activity. Remember, it's probably not part of that 10% of your total budget. So you don't need to include that. Now, for that procurement activity, this one is used very sparingly and is only available under the institutional capacity intent. Here you can see 2 examples of purchases that are not procurement as defined by the SPR system. So things like purchasing a database would be content acquisition, or purchasing laptops for a learning lab would be considered instruction. Now, as a reminder, we have outcomes reporting built into the SPR, both at the activity level and the project level. An outcome is the effect of programs and services, something that changes an individual's life or changes the community. It's a change in their knowledge, attitude, skills, behavior, or condition. And what we're trying to do in these outcomes is document what changed for the participants due to their use of a program or service. Now we have this chart. This may look familiar to you when it comes to activity outcomes. There are 4 times when you will be prompted to include outcome information for an activity, and those are the ones showing up in orange. 3 of them involve surveying the library workforce, and the other is surveying the general public. For example, if you have an instruction program for the library workforce, and in the mode and it is in the mode of a program, then you should have surveyed those participants. And we realize that this requires a lot more forward planning. This can't be done after the fact. And you can see the screenshot on the bottom is how it shows up in the SPR. Once you input in an activity and that little outcomes button shows up as orange, that means we're expecting outcome survey information in that activity. Now, note that IMLS does not expect you to have surveyed children, so no one under the age of 18. Activities that involve children do not have to have outcome figures, but that said, we want you to include in the overall project outcome section some information on how many children participated or some things that you observed in that project. So some budget reminders. We're not going to touch too extensively on the budget section here, but we want to provide a few tips. Conference registrations go in the services category, not travel. Purchases of applications, software, and licensing, those also go under services, not supplies. And in general, please avoid using vague or misleading language. Things like other related costs or miscellaneous do not work in the reporting here. So please be specific in those budget categories when you're describing what you paid for. Now, for the salaries and wages and benefits category, when filling info out in this category, please provide the position titles and FTE equivalents, especially when there is more than one staff person being quantified here. Now, these 2 screenshots provide good examples of budget descriptions. The first shows the differentiation between LSTA funds and state funds covering that position. And the second shows how a single staff member's salary is allocated across multiple projects. And we've said it before, I will say it again, we do not need names, we just need the position titles. So the other operational expenses category is one we see errors in often. This category in the budget is only for indirect costs for a subrecipient. If you, as the SLAA, have indirect costs, those should be represented in the administrative project. Now we have some examples on this slide. The 2 at the top were returned because the charges described are not considered other operational expenses as they directly relate to the project. You can see that these types of charges could be misperceived as other type charges or charge that doesn't necessarily fit within the other budget boxes. But for the purpose of the SPR, this category is only reserved for indirect costs. So for both of these instances, you would want to move those to services. Now, the example at the bottom is what we want to see when filling out this budget category, which are indirect costs for your subrecipients. We'd like to see the specific indirect cost rate percentage that was charged to the subrecipient, if you can provide that. And again, if you have a project that combines multiple subrecipients, if you're doing that bundling, it would be ideal to itemize those costs and have the indirect cost rate for each of your subrecipients. So additional materials, remember to upload any additional materials if you have them. These really help us understand the story and what went on for a project. We really love photos. We use them internally and externally in our work at IMLS. And attaching other things really is helpful too. So that includes outreach materials, curricula, website links. You can include sign-up forms or any sort of marketing materials. So please, please, please use that field. So project outcomes, I talked about activity outcomes. So projects may not always have obvious outcomes, especially if you have a project that you continue from year to year. But this section is a good place to justify why you are continuing to do this project every year or why you will not be continuing it. Some ideas that you can include here are things that help save you money, changes in logistics and the effects of those changes and the reasons for those changes, quotes from users, or anecdotal stories that you've heard that happened during the project. Now, we understand also that all the questions in the outcomes, project outcomes, may not necessarily apply to all of your projects. So instead of leaving it blank, please just put NA or not applicable. That will signal to us that you didn't inadvertently just skip the question. And please remember that these questions are public. They go onto the SPR public website after we review and approve your projects. So the public has access to them as well. Project tags, they're also of interest to us for national level analysis, and they could be helpful for you as well. This is an open text field with no controlled vocabulary, so you can do what you think is best in terms of tags, and if you have multiple tags, do separate them with commas. Match-only projects. Some states do have a match-only project where the budget would have $0 for LSTA funds, but it's covering the match funds, the state funds. These will be reported as any other project, and the budget figures reported will have those figures in the appropriate categories, and you will need to at least identify an intent and have at least one activity. So please treat match-only projects as you would an LSTA funded project. All right, well, you've completed your data entry and gotten all your information into your projects, and now you have to change your project status. You do this from, you change the status from draft to completed, and you have to do this before the validation or certification process. The best way to do it is to do it in bulk in the project listing area. You can just check all projects and change the status to completed. Now, you also need to change the status of the administrative project separately from the projects. You have to open it separately and change the status manually. And for the financial status report, that is automatically completed. But again, we've said it before, I will say it again, after you finished all of your project data input, go into the final FSR and click save, and that way it will roll up any new data from those projects into the FSR and be the most up to date. And now we're at certification. Your state librarian or chief or authorized official will need to certify the SPR, and this screenshot here shows the steps for them to do that. If you want to validate the project, all LSTA coordinators can validate the whole SPR report before the certifying official certifies. That will help you eliminate any risks of errors that may show up at certification, but you can do the validation, and it's the same pathway here. If you go under certify reports, you would just click the validate reports button, which would show up orange for you. Now, this will certify the 2022 reports, the FSR, and the admin project. Now, you can ensure certification by checking the project status under list projects, and it will say certified, or by looking at the certification fields in the FSR, which once that is certified, it will contain the name and the date stamp of your certifying official. final reminders, taking you guys home. So we got the reporting deadlines. You guys seem to be pretty on top of that, and that's great. If you need, if you want to have a place where you want to play around with the SPR or you want to train a colleague, we do have an SPR sandbox. If you don't have access to that, contact your program officer, let us know, we can set you up in that. And also any sort of resources, extra resources for the SPR and how to use it are found in the Grants to States manual, and the link is at the bottom of this slide. All right, with 2 minutes to spare, we have concluded our refresher webinar, and you have our contact information listed on the slide, but we are open for any final questions. Feel free to unmute or put them in the chat.
Maybe I'll just go over a few quick questions that have come in during, so that the people listening to the recording will get the benefits. There was a question about whether when marketing projects use LSTA funds, whether they have to acknowledge that in the marketing that this was, funded by LSTA, and the answer was yes. And that is part of our acknowledgement requirements. There was a question about whether in the budget boxes, instead of putting percentages for salaries and FTE, if people could put exact dollar amounts, and that is also acceptable. We just need precise levels of detail. And then there was a question about whether the entire SPR now has plain text in it, and that the answer to that was yes. It is all plain text at this point. Thanks for those great questions. We also had some shout outs to the validation feature. If you want to head off errors before your authorized certifying official accidentally gets them, that is a great tool.
Who hasn't done that?
And I think we've covered it, folks, and you have our contact information. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your work to report these funds and be good stewards of this federal investment in libraries. Your work is the reason for why we do what we do, and it proves back to Congress and the administration how important this work is. So we don't take it lightly. We appreciate you, and we look forward to reading your reports.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Thank you.
Somebody's headed back to the